listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. We are joined now by the fourth-ranking Republican in the United States House of Representatives, Congressman Thaddeus McCotter of Michigan. He is the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee. Is it Policy Conference Committee?
Republican House Policy Committee.
House Policy Committee. Correction. Thank you. And in that capacity, he has considerable influence over the Republican thinking and direction in the United States Congress. And it is of very considerable importance that we put to you, sir, a question that I know is actually before your counterparts on the Senate side, but of considerable importance to all of us at the moment. And that is something I talked about in the monologue before you joined us, namely the fact that Elena Kagan, woman, as you know, being promoted by the president to become the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, has been in her previous incarnation as Dean of Harvard University Law School an active promoter of what has become called Sharia-compliant finance. And I was just speculating with the audience that if this were the Cold War, and we had somebody as the dean of Harvard University Law School who was actively involved in that time promoting a Soviet communist effort to promote business with the Soviets and thereby help infiltrate or at least legitimate their activities in America. My guess is that it would have at least have been an issue in the hearings, something that people would have inquired about, wanted to know what her attitude was before she got anywhere near a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court. Should that not be the case with respect to Sharia as well, knowing what we know about this totalitarian ideology and its determination to destroy us?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have in the Senate confirmation hearings, Frank, as you're touching on, is nothing ever seems to be discussed.
Yeah.
The answer that has now become standard is it may be something I would have to rule on in the future. The senators receive no instruction as to how they can provide the advice and consent that is constitutionally required to the president in terms of the confirmation. They have no ability to explain to their constituents why or why they did not vote for the individual. The public, and most importantly, learns nothing about the individual other than what they hear in the media. And so a very necessary and proper part of the Constitution, which holds, for me, I think, a great deal of import, because this is a Supreme Court lifetime appointment, means that the farce of these hearings will continue to go on ad infinitum. And as we both know, Frank, what happens is these seats are now increasingly viewed through a political prism rather than through the judicial prism of are they competent, are they qualified, is their character sufficient to warrant a lifetime appointment to the most powerful judicial spot in the United States.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I actually am quite concerned that one of the issues that will be before the court probably in the not-too-distant future is whether it is constitutional for our government to own a company that is promoting Sharia through Sharia-compliant financial products, namely AIG. And so, in a way, it's precisely because she may well have to be voting on such a question that we'd like to know whether she should be disqualified, recused at the very least, given her past background. But Congressman McCotter, let me switch gears on you because you've written a very important piece. We'd hoped to have you on earlier in the week, and I talked a bit about it, but I want to talk to you personally about it because I thought it was absolutely superb. It was one of your contributions to a great new venture that I'm very proud to be associated with, of course, Big Peace. And it talks about the Obama practice, or I call it doctrine, really, in historical terms that are very worrying. And that is in the context of appeasement. Give us your quick take on why that very serious charge is in order at present.
Well, I think you can assess the way, and you have been a champion of this, Frank, the way that the administration is approaching Iran. They are trying to find ways to accommodate them. And people are often very concerned, why is the administration trying to accommodate Iran? And I think it goes back to a fundamental difference of opinion between individuals of both parties who believe that Iran is a strategic threat that has to be directly addressed, and people generally on the left who think that it can be accommodated. The difference is this. this administration wants a long-term settlement with that regime. Now, people like you and I know that you cannot have a long-term settlement with a tyrannical regime that shoots women in the streets for protesting for freedom. There's no accommodating an evil regime. Ronald Reagan taught us that.
Today, we're hearing that Hillary Clinton is unveiling in the Far East a new set of sanctions against the North Korean regime, a regime that I would have argued, at least up to this point, the administration was also very keen to engage. They have signed into law sanctions that Congress, despite them really, enacted by overwhelming, as you know, bipartisan majorities, something you've been very strongly supportive of, Congressman McCotter. Do these steps signal any deviation from this appeasement approach that has been of such concern to all of us, I think?
Well, I think there is clearly a difference of opinion between the administration and the Congress. As you pointed out, Frank, the threat that Iran poses is well recognized by members on both sides of the aisle here in the House and members on both sides of the aisle in the Senate. And it seems to be, ironically, that a heavily Democratic Congress is in disagreement with a heavily Democratic president and his administration, heavily Democratic presidential administration, as to what the nature of the threat is from Iran and how it should be addressed. So I guess it's a moment where some of us have that cliched, although it may be, view of is the glass half full or half empty. Now, I tend to think that having a Congress that understands this is probably, to me, is what keeps us going. It gives us hope for the future to see one of those areas where, as you know, Frank, back in the happier times for the United States, where Republicans and Democrats would get along to address the threats to the United States as enemies. We're seeing that in the House today, and I think that that's going to carry on.
Yeah. Congressman McCotter, the minute and a half we have left with you, in addition to your leadership role as a chairman of the House Republican Policy Committee, you are also a member of two committees that have particular relevance, perhaps, to this question of the latest sanctions that Hillary Clinton is unveiling vis-a-vis North Korea, namely going after sort of financial underpinnings, the criminal activities that the North Korean regime has been using to support its weapons of mass destruction program and otherwise keep the regime going. We've seen in the past that those have actually had a crippling effect on North Korea. Do you think they will this time? And is it something that we should remain firmly engaged in rather than back away from when they start squealing, as they did the last time?
Well, I agree with you, Frank, that we have to do everything we can to keep pressure on that North Korean communist regime. But as we know from dealings with Iran, from dealings with the North Koreans, what you see are communist China and Putin's Russia have no trouble dealing with these countries. The communist Chinese do it much more subtly, much more stealthily, but the support is there. And as long as the Russians and the Chinese do not share our attitude and our understanding of what the nature of the threat from North Korea and Iran are, then what you're going to continue to see is an open back door to those regimes that help to undermine or at least mute the effect of our sanctions.
Right, and this is really the nub of the issue. Congressman Fighter McCotter, stay with me for just 1 second, and I will say goodbye to you now on the air. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your efforts to help secure our